Okay, guys, so here we go. We're about to enter our next phase of Greek history, the 5th century BC, the 400s, and the story of the Greek wars. So there's going to be a little bit of a setup first, and then we'll get into the key words, and then we'll kind of go from there in terms of the lecture. So this is going to be all week, right? We have like a week's full of lectures on the wars. And so let me start by just kind of setting things up before we even get to the key words. So let's go to our slide here. I just call this the setup slide. So this is what we're doing. We're now in the 5th century BC. And, we've talked basically about Greek history from 800 to 500 BC. Now we're covering the period from 500 to 400 BC. So before I even start this, the first thing I want you to know is that I also put up your review sheet for the midterm. I put up the review sheet. I put up a rubric, how to do well on the midterm. I even put up a sheet on how to organize the essays, some tips on organizing each of the possible essays. So you're going to want to start looking at that seriously right now, right? The sooner you start on that, the better off you will be. There's a lot of information, and even though the exam's going to be open note, open book, there's simply no way you're going to be looking all this stuff up in the amount of time you have. So I would highly recommend you know the material well, you prepare it ahead of time, you review it, and then if you need to use your notes or books while you're typing in your exam, okay, that's fine. It should help you out, but you don't want to rely on that. So that's the first thing I wanted is to remind you about. So this is what we're going to do as we continue on our story here, and we're doing more Greek history. What we have are two major wars that you're going to need to know about: the Persian War and the Peloponnesian War. This lecture today is going to focus primarily on the Persian War, and we'll do a whole other lecture on the Peloponnesian War. So one of the themes that you need to know, and you can see it's one of the review sheet on your review sheet, one of the possible essay questions is what are the causes, what are the impacts, and what are the causes, what are the battles, what are the impacts of the Persian and Peloponnesian War, respectively. And so that's one, right? So you're going to know the causes, the battles, and the impacts of the Persian and Peloponnesian Wars. And Peloponnesian War, not going to do a lot of battles. Persian War, we'll do a couple that you'll definitely need to know. So that's one. Meanwhile, I also have this set up here. Who are these names? Chiron, Pericles, Cleon, Alcibiades. Obviously, you're going to write them all down. And these years. These years are when each of these three men, or four men in this case, were the most influential people in Athens, right? So these are all Athenians. All four of these names, they're going to come up and be pretty important as our lecture goes on. So I'm even just setting it up for you. So that's the second thing. So we're kind of doing three things here. The big theme is Persian Peloponnesian War, causes, battles, impacts. Second kind of thing to focus on is these four Athenians, excuse me, and these three generations. I call these kind of the three major generations in Athens in the 5th century. They'll each have a nickname. Get it down now, get it down later, but we'll call this the Marathon generation. This will be called the Golden Age, and then we'll talk about the Age of Rust. So each of these will have a nickname that you're going to want to know as well when we get to it. So there's that. And then the final thing you want to do is also still keep in mind comparing and contrasting Athens and Sparta. As we talk about the Persian and Peloponnesian War, what more can we learn about Athens and Sparta? All right, so that's just the initial setup. Hopefully you got all that. You got all that down. And now we'll go to the key words for the causes of the war, in this case, the Persian War. So get all these down, and I'm going to explain what all these terms mean and how the Persian War begins. It's a lot of fun. I love this story. It's a great story. It's one of these events that you could have fought 1,000 times, and I think like 995 times would have turned out differently than it did in history. So get all this down, right? And let me go to our maps that are going to start our story here, right? So you've got all these key terms, and this is just the keywords for the causes of the war. You're going to have more keywords later. All right, so this is just kind of our side-by-side images of the Persian world and the Greek world, right? And what we know is that by 500 BC, everything in the green is the Persian Empire, right? All this area here, and here you have Greece in the green. What we also know is Greece was divided, right? Greece was fragmented. It was a bunch of city-states, but the Persian Empire was one big united power, while the Greek world was a bunch of little city-states. So that's important to remember as well. So how does this war begin, right? How does this conflict between the Greeks and the Persians start? Well, we'll start with, there's, I guess, three major points we want to talk about in terms of why the war starts. Number one is long term, right? And by that I mean that, the Persian Empire has been expanding since the time of Cyrus. So remember Cyrus? We talked about him in a previous lecture around 550 BC. If Cyrus never moves from Persepolis all the way over here westward, then the Persian War never begins because the Persians never get to the Greeks. So that's one thing to keep in mind. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this in my other lecture on the Persian Empire, but it's just a little side note. Persia today, that is Persepolis, that's modern day Iran, and there are a lot of people from Iran today who still like to be called Persians because of the long history connected with, the Persian Empire. But anyways, a little tangent. So that's cause number one, just the movement of Cyrus to the west. If you don't have that, you don't have the Persian War. So that's kind of what I would call as like one of the long-term causes. That happened like 50 years earlier. But as we get closer to the year 500 BC, when the Persian War is actually going to begin, 499 if you want to be precise, I just use circa 500, it's easy to remember, a couple things are going to happen that help trigger the war as well. What else is going to happen around 500 BC? So let's go into this. So here's just our map of the Greek world. Here you see Ionia again, the coast of Asia Minor, Ionia, and here you have the Greek world. So what happens around 500 BC are two events that are going to help trigger the Persian War. One of them is a little convoluted. You got to follow it carefully. The other one is pretty straightforward. I'm going to start with a convoluted event first, get that out of the way. So right around 500 BC, there was the city-state of Naxos, right? Naxos right here, this island in the Aegean Sea. And the city-state of Naxos, right around 500 BC, was having some internal conflict emerging. And as they had this internal conflict emerging, the people in Naxos were like, well, we don't like our government. We want to overthrow our government. And they wanted to have a new rulership over Naxos. The problem is the people who wanted to do that didn't have the military might to do it. What they did, however, is they went to the city-state of Miletus, right? Miletus was one of the key words. And in the city-state of Miletus, you had a leader named Aristogoras, right? Also one of those key words you have there. And so you have Miletus and is the city-state. Aristogoras, he is the leader of Miletus. Anyways, so the people of Naxos go to the leader of Miletus, a man named Aristogoras, and say, hey, will you help us, overthrow our government? And Aristogoras, as you can see here, is in Ionia, right? That's a very important word, Ionia. He's in the land that's really under Persian influence. And so he has a lot of connections with the Persians. And so what he does, Aristogoras, is he goes to the Persians and say, hey, how'd you like to, be involved in this war on Naxos? And the Persians say, all right, sure, why not? We can, maybe get a little loot, get a little money out of it. It might be worth it. And so there's a small Persian force that goes to invade the island of Naxos. Not a big force, not a massive force, but a force that goes to invade Naxos. So remember, this all started more from internal issues within the island of Naxos. Doesn't matter. They send a small force. It's a debacle. It doesn't go well. It doesn't succeed at all, actually. Why is this important? How is this a cause? Well, it's a cause of the greater Persian War for a couple of reasons. The Greeks on the island of Naxos had just been invaded by a Persian force, right? So that's not going to make them happy. It's not going to make the Greek world happy. It's going to make a lot of Greeks very uneasy. The other thing is it was a debacle. And the Persian emperor at the time, in 500 BC, was that man named Darius or Darius the First. Remember we talked about him? And remember what I said about Darius the First. He did not like it when things did not go well. Well, something went pretty poorly right now. His forces were taken to the island of Naxos. It was a big debacle. Didn't work out well. Darius is upset. Who is Darius going to blame? He's going to use this as an excuse to blame the Greeks. He says, oh, this Greek, issues and their problems, it caused my troops to be taken. There were damages and so forth, and so he's unhappy. So Darius is already a bit upset now with the Greeks, and he's just because of what happened on Naxos. So I know that's a little bit of a convoluted. It's actually much more detailed than what I gave you. By the way, one of the key historians on all of this is Herodotus. If you want to know where do we get the information on a lot of these wars, Herodotus is the Greek historian who tells us the story of the Persian War. It's a good primary source if you want to pick it up and read it. Okay, anyways, so that there's that going on. So now what? So now you've got this, long term of the Persians moving into Ionia. Now around 500 BC, you've got the issue of Naxos, and then this is very clear and very important. Just as the Naxos debacle is happening, you get what is called the Ionian Revolt. What is the Ionian Revolt? The Ionian Revolt is when the city-states in Ionia decide they don't want to pay taxes anymore to the Persian emperor, right? Yeah, we're under your influence, but we still don't want to pay you taxes. That's the Ionian Revolt. And Miletus was one of the areas that led the Ionian Revolt. So obviously at this point, Darius is really upset. The Persian emperor, he's like, oh, okay, so, they have this debacle at Naxos, and now they don't pay their taxes, and he's really upset. Now, obviously, the people in Ionia know this. The people in Ionia know that Darius is upset, right? What are they going to do? They're going to get help. Who are you going to turn to the help from? Well, the Greeks, the rest of the Greeks. But you can't go to the Greeks because there is no united Greek power. So they go to Sparta and they say, hey, Spartans, will you help us fight against this Persian Empire? And the Spartans say, no, we're not interested in doing this. We don't want to help you fight against the Persian Empire, right? So there's that. So that's one issue. Second, is and you say, why did the Spartans say no? The Spartans say no primarily because they don't get involved in things that quickly. It's not their problem. So then they go to Athens and they go to the Athenians and they tell the Athenians, hey, Athens, would you like to fight against the Persian Empire? Now, remember, by now, Athens is a democracy, right? And so they debate, they discuss it. And some Athenians say, no, 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 we're not interested. And other Athenians say, yes, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go fight against the Persian Empire. Now, you got to pause for a second and wonder, what would any Athenian, why would any Athenian think, yeah, let's go fight the Persian Empire? I mean, remember the massive size of the Persian Empire. Athens is just like this little red dot here, right? That's all of Athens. The Persian Empire was massive. I'll kind of show you this again, maybe when I show you another map of the Persians again. But it's just, if you remember, it's massive. This is just Asia Minor. It's just a little piece of it. And so why would any Greek cities, why would any Athenian say yes? And there was a couple reasons. Some Athenians said yes because they didn't think they could defeat the Persian Empire, but if they helped the Ionian Revolt succeed and these Greek city-states gain more independence from Persia, then Athens gets a lot of influence over Ionia. So that was one reason. Some of them thought, hey, we could gain some influence over Ionia if we can help the Ionian Revolt succeed. We're not going to defeat the Persian Empire, but maybe we can help the Ionian Revolt succeed. The Ionian Revolt succeed. The other thing is this. For some Athenians, they just liked fame. And what is a better way than acquiring fame than to take on the biggest, baddest guy in the block? And Big Bad in 500 BC was, of course, the Persian Empire. So what ends up happening at this point is that the Greeks, the Athenians, do decide to send a small force to go and help the Ionian Revolt. They send this force, they burn down a Persian city in Ionia. And now the Persian Emperor Darius is really upset. So first they take my troops on the island of Naxos, then they refuse to pay taxes, and now these puny, tiny, pathetic Athenians, they dare attack me, Darius, mighty Persian Emperor. Well, all right, I am just going to take my empire and take this little Greek world and add it to my Persian universe. And this is kind of the final thing that's going to draw Darius into this war and bring the Persian War to start. So those are essentially the major causes of the Persian War, right? How the Persian War begins, how it starts. That's kind of the story in terms of how it all gets going. All right, now, as the Persian War begins, let me just say one more thing about this. Some historians believe all of that didn't matter, that if there was never the Ionian Revolt, never the debacle at Naxos, that the Persian War still would have happened. Because, I mean, what have the Persian Empire been doing for the last 50, 60 years? They've been expanding. This is the next logical place for them to go. And so there was this thought that they were going to do this either way. So there you go. So maybe that's how the war began and started anyway. So you have that in terms of how the war begins. All right, so that's essentially how the war starts. This is just an image of Darius, right? See kind of a good image of Darius there. And then we're going to be able to start getting into the war itself in a second. Okay, so here's some key words that we're going to get into for the battles involving the war. Okay. So get all this down, and then we'll get into how the war itself goes and how it all really begins to explode. Okay, get all those words down. I'll explain these names. There's that Chiron name again. We'll get into that. All right, so here we are back to our Greek map, and it's here that we can start talking about how the war unfolds. So when the war begins, Darius, as Persian emperor, is not going to be able to conquer the Greek world. Remember, the Greeks are all divided. So initially, the war, when it starts in the year 499 BC, is not Darius just sending a massive force just to demolish the Greek world. What he initially does is send a small force with an emissary with a few, 100 men maybe, and they go to just a normal little Greek city-state. Now remember, Athens and Sparta were fairly large. Some of these other Greek city-states were pretty small, maybe 300, 400, 500, maybe 1,000 hoplite soldiers. That's it. That entire population of 20, 30,000 people. Some of these Greek city-states weren't massive. And so Darius knows this, and so what he does is he takes his force to a Greek city. And this is all in the 490s, like 497, 496, 495, 494, 493 BC, right? And what he does is instead of just hammering in, he gets to the walls of a Greek city-state. And his forces simply just kind of knock on the door. At which point the Greeks approach him and go, who is it? And the Persians say, it's us, the Persians. And the Persians say, what do you want? And the Persians say, we have come for earth and water. Then there's this kind of eerie silence. And then the leader of the Greek city-state, let me show you here, comes out with two pots. If you can see, two pots, right? In one pot, there's going to be earth. Okay, we saw that. And in the other pot, there's going to be, you can see it well, water. Okay, earth and water. The Greek leader takes these pots of earth and water, goes to the Persian emissary, and presents them with the pots of earth and water. There you go. All right. What just happened? Well, what just happened is those Greek city-states just surrendered. The earth and water, symbols of their surrender. And this is essentially how the Persian War begins. It doesn't begin with this massive onslaught. It actually begins with this kind of phase of, just demanding earth and water. All right, well, this goes on for a number of city-states, but eventually the Persian emissaries get to a couple more powerful city-states, especially Athens. And when they get to Athens, Athens refuses to give the Persian emissary earth and water. Even in one account I read that they took the Persian forces and threw them out in the mud where their pigs would live. There's your earth and water. So there we are around 492 BC roughly. The Persian War has technically been going on for about 7 years. And now, the gloves are off, right? So now the Persians are not honored with earth and water from the Athenians. What do? They go back home. They go back home and they say, hey, Darius, these mean, nasty Athenians over here, they did not give you earth and water. That was not very nice of them at all. And of course, Darius is very upset. question is, what do you do if you're Athens right now? Well, if you're Athens right now, you kind of pissed off the Persian emperor. Remember, you also already burnt down one of his cities about 7, 8 years earlier, so he's not happy. And so if you're Athens, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to go get help. Who do you go get help from? Well, you go to the Spartans and you tell them, guess what we just did, right? And you go to the Spartans and you tell them, hey, we just, kind of ticked off this Persian emperor a bit. He's probably going to come after us. What do you say? Do you want to help us fight against the Persian Empire? Now, keep in mind, Athens and Sparta are rivals. They do not like each other. But Athens still goes to Sparta because they know they need help. And Sparta looks at this, and Sparta tells the Athenians, we're in, we'll help. Which at first seems kind of counterintuitive because I've been saying, the Spartans are slow to act, keep to themselves. But the Spartans are also not stupid. The Spartans realize that if Athens falls, they're going to fall too at some point. And so they agree to help the Athenians. And once Athens and Sparta agree to join forces, well, then all the Greek city-states say, we're in too. And then all of a sudden you have this kind of coalition of all of these Greek city-states willing to work together to fight against the Persian Empire. Now, still, perspective-wise, they're tiny. I mean, the entire population of the Greek world is smaller than the army of the Persian Empire, but at least now they're willing to work together. Without that, the Persians would have just hammered all the Greek city-states and boom, bye-bye Greek history, right? So that just gives you some perspective right there. That was the first really important thing that needed to happen. So now the Greeks are willing to work together, and now we get to our actual first major battles. 490 BC. So in 490 BC, we get to our first major battle. The Persians are going to send about 20,000 men across the Aegean Sea with the goal of getting to Athens. They send a Persian general, one of those key words, Datis, there with about 20,000 men, right? So about 20,000 men, right? 20K, 20,000 men they sent. That's a lot, right? And the Greeks know this is coming. They know this invasion is coming, and they have to prepare. The Greeks that led the preparation for this first battle in 490 were two Athenians, Miltiades and Cimon. Again, both those words that you had there before. And so Miltiades and Cimon, two very important men, father and son. Miltiades was the father, Cimon was the son. And their job was to recruit as many Greeks as possible to fight against this first major Persian force, 20,000 men. How many men do they get? About 10,000. Not that many, right? Not nearly what they wanted. And they expected several thousand more men who were to be there, and those men were supposed to be Spartans who did not show up. So this is not looking good, right? So we have this first battle at 490. You have the Greeks with about 10,000 men, the Persians with about 20,000 men, and the Greeks are lacking their most significant forces, the Spartans. What happens? Well, this battle is going to be a disaster. Of the 10,000 men Miltiades had, he loses about 200, right? Miltiades and Cimon. Of the 20,000 forces Datis and the Persians had, they lose about 6,000. So you go, well, wait a second, what just happened? The Persians are outnumbering the Greeks 2-1. The Greeks don't have their best soldiers. How did Datis pull this off? Well, this is what's going to happen. So a little bit more detail about this first battle. I haven't even given you the name of it yet, but you're going to need to know it here in a second. This first battle was not fought in Athens. What Miltiades did is he knew that the Persians were going to try to get to them. So what he did is he set an attack over here in Marathon nearby the city of Athens. Why did he pick the city of Marathon? Well, he picked the city of Marathon because he knew the geography well. And let me show you what Miltiades and Miltiades and Cimon were planning. This is the Battle of Marathon. And it's right by the coast. And here you see the Greek forces, and in the red here you see the Persian forces. And these lines represent heavy mountainous terrain. And what had happened is the Persians did not know that the field in Marathon narrows fairly quickly. And so the Persians land. They think they have a lot of opportunity. This is where geography becomes important again, to get their men out in their formations that they like, but they don't. And they get off their boats. They start to go into or try to get into formation, and the Greeks pounce on them. Miltiades and Chimon's men pounce on them. And by doing that, they just demolish the forces of the Persians, and they have to retreat. In fact, this battle was so successful for the Athenians that during the battle, one of the Athenians leaves the battle site at Marathon and goes to Athens to tell them, hey, we're going to win. Now, how does he get there? Well, he runs and 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 he runs all the way from the city of Marathon to Athens. He gets to Athens, yells the word Nike. Nike is the Greek word for victory, and then he drops dead because he ran so far. Now, how far did he run from Marathon to Athens? 26.2 miles, the length of a marathon. And that's why a marathon is, well, a marathon, right? 26.2 miles. So there you go, another one of those little contributions. So now, the war is now really going, right? Yeah, this first battle, the Greeks survived. And it's really amazing because if this battle marathon didn't go the way it did, if the Persians didn't land at Marathon and went straight to Athens, Athens was very undefended. Athens could have fallen right there and then. But instead, the Greeks survived. They win the Battle of Marathon, and they live to fight another day. So that was all in 490 BC. Those are all the details, the names, Datis, Cimon, Miltiades. You want to know all of that for the Battle of Marathon. All right, well, now what? Well, we jump ahead a bit. So that was 490 BC. 486 BC, the Persian emperor dies, Darius. He is going to be replaced by his son, a man named Xerxes, right? And Xerxes is going to decide he wants to continue his father's plan to invade the Greek world. So this is going to take a little time, right? So he has to reorganize. After the Battle of Marathon, the Persians got kind of their nose bloodied a little bit, and so they need to reorganize. And so what Xerxes is going to do is organize a new force around the year 480 BC. Around 480 BC, he's going to organize a massive force. Now, if you believe Hollywood, about 2 million men are about to descend on the Greek world. Well, it wasn't 2 million. If you ever saw the movie The 300, very dramatic movie, of course, based on all of this. No, it wasn't 300. It was not 2 million, but it was probably about 400,000 or 500,000, which in itself is still stunning because those are type of numbers you see during, World War I, World War II, in terms of that many men. And what Xerxes is going to do is launch a two-strike attack, one by land and one by sea. On this map, hopefully you can see it clearly, you have the two routes. You have in the red, you have the land route, and in the blue, you have the sea route, right? So you can kind of see that. That's what you see there. Anyway, so he's going to organize these forces, land and sea. And they start in 480 BC. Now, the first thing I want to get into is before we talk about what Xerxes is going to do, as he's going by land, he's got a problem. And the problem his forces are going to run into is right over here. There's water. And so there's a very narrow waterway there called the Hellespont. Again, it was one of those key words you had. And so there's this Hellespont waterway there. And he's got to get his men there. Now, he could, you can't even see it on this map, go all the way around north, all the way around the Black Sea. You don't even see it all on this map. This is going to add about another 2 years to his journey. So he doesn't want to go all the way around that. He'd rather just cross the Hellespont. But to do that, you got to cross this rocky waterway, which is difficult because his ships were already being used to ferry his men across, the Navy, right? What he does have are some old ships, these old pontoon-style boats. And what Xerxes does is take these ships, like 700 of them, and tie them together and create, ready for this, a bridge of ships across the Hellespont. Take a look at this. Right, this is the bridge of ships across the Hellespont. Ties them together with very special fabric, and then he simply has his men march across the Hellespont. Now, the Greeks had spies there. They could see what's going on. And if you're the Greeks and you just had a handful of spies there and they go back and report this to everybody else, they go, guys, we got a real problem here because this is not just a big army. These guys are smart, right? These guys know what they're doing. They know how to fight. They're very intelligent. This takes some really big engineering to do. And so that's kind of interesting and important as well that you have this bridge of ships that they build across the Hellespont because it tells you that the Persians are big and smart, very good engineering. All right, so he gets his men across the ships and we start moving down. Now, where does he get to? Well, the Greeks know they're coming, right? And the Greeks are like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do, the Greeks? And the Greeks look at their map and they go, Thermopylae. That's what we do. And they decide to go to Thermopylae. Why Thermopylae? And who goes there? So this is going to be our second major battle. We had the Battle of Marathon in the year 480. Now we have the Battle of Thermopylae, and that's going to be in the, Battle of Marathon was 490, and in 480, the Battle of Thermopylae. So what happens? Well, this is a very famous battle. This is if you've seen the movie The 300, what the 300 movie is all about. And basically what happens is the Greeks decide to send forces to Thermopylae because it is very narrow. If you've never seen that movie, essentially what Thermopylae is, it's a narrow pass, it's mountains, and then it drops to the sea, right? So kind of visualize a narrow pass, kind of maybe if driven on PCH, mountains on one side, and then a sea that's straight below. And the Greeks said, well, we put our men here because no matter how many forces that the Persian emperor has in this narrow pass, you can only put so many, right? You can't just, shove in 1,000,000 men or 100,000 men or whatever through a narrow pass. And so the Greeks say, we'll stay there. Now, which Greeks? Well, if you believe Hollywood, just 300 Spartans went. Well, it was true. There were 300 Spartans who are going to go to Thermopylae. There are also going to be thousands of other Greeks. The reasons we talk about the 300 Spartans is because they are going to be there till the very end of this battle. So we get to 480 BC. The Persians are making their way. You can see exactly where Thermopylae is right here on the map. And there's these really dramatic scenes, again, told to us by Herodotus, that Greek historian. What does he tell us? Well, there's this great story that the Persians are there. They see these 300 Spartans, a few other 1,000 Greeks, and the Persians have just countless numbers of men. And they approach the Spartans. And they tell the Spartans, look how many men we have. Just get out of our way. And the Spartans are, of course, like, we're not moving by the hair of our chinny chin chin. Remember what we know about Spartan society. Remember what the Spartan mom told her son. You better come back victorious or you better come back dead being carried on your hopalon shield, right? Remember that? And so the Spartans at this point look at the Persians and say, we're not moving. And the Persians go to them, are you mad? Look how many archers we have, the Persians say. We have so many archers that when they fire their arrows, they will literally blot out the sun. To which the Spartans say, that is fine, and we shall fight in the shade. That's the Spartan attitude, and it's on. And so then you get the battle begins. And the first wave of Persians come in, and the Greeks hold them off. It's a narrow pass. And a second wave, and the Greeks hold them off. And a third wave, and the Greeks hold them off. This goes on for an entire day. Goes on for a second day. This goes on for 3 days, this battle of Thermopylae. By the third day, most of the other Greeks had done, dead, left, whatever. But the 300 Spartans are still there. They're still there. They're still not, they're not going to retreat no matter what. Remember, no matter what happens. And they're fighting and they're tired. They've been like 3 days. Remember, you have to think, how much time do they have to eat, drink, sleep? Very little to none. And it seemed like the Spartans can just keep doing this forever. It's like, how long can they hold them off? And then on the third day, something happened. One of those 300 Spartans was apparently a traitor or a spy, a man named Ephialtes. And he snuck across the lines, went to the Persians, and told the Persians, hey, you're going about this all wrong. You don't have to go straight through Thermopylae. There's another mountain pass you can get around. There's other passes through these geography, the mountains, right? And if you take your men and you circle around, kind of drawing this for you, you could just circle around this other pass, which the Persians didn't know about, and then you can surround the Spartans. And that's exactly what happens on the third day. And the geographical advantage that the Spartans had now becomes a disadvantage because now you've got, mountains on one side, the pass, sea on another side, and then you got Persians on either side of you. And so this is a point where it's just not good at all. The Spartans, of course, keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting, but they're all going to fall and get killed at the Battle of Thermopylae, right? So there's that. All right, really cool place to go and visit if you ever do go to Greece. If you ever go to Thermopylae, there's actually a memorial there of their king, of the Spartans who led the battle at Thermopylae, King Leonidas. He's the one in the background here, in case you can't tell. There he is. So there's King Leonidas at Thermopylae, very famous monument to him there, because they held off the Spartans at this battle. But at the end of the day, remember, the Persians win. The Persians do defeat the Spartans, but Leonidas has still got a memorial there. This is kind of an interesting map. Let me try to explain this to you here. Because people go visit the battle today, and it's hard to read, so let me try to explain this. Here is the coastline, or sorry, here is the battle site, right there, if you can see it, that little dot. Right next to it is the coastline. Now, if you go to Thermopylae today, you're not going to see what you see in the movie, because that's the coastline. Right in between there, that narrow pass is where the battle once stood. This line up here that I'm drawing, this curvy line, that's the coast today, guys. So what has happened is over 2,500 years is the water level has gone down. And so there's actually the distance between the mountains and the river and the water is massive today. I can tell you exactly. I don't remember. I should have probably checked a little bit better on this, but it's not hundreds of. It's kilometers, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, whatever it is, right? It's not 100 yards like it was back then. So that's why if you ever go there today, it looks very different than back then. So, anyways, you have the Battle of Thermopylae. The Spartans are defeated. The Persians are going to move forward, right? Where do they move? Well, they move all the way to Athens. And in fact, they get through Thermopylae, there's Thermopylae, and they get to Athens, right? And when they get to Athens, they burn much of Athens to the ground. So here we are around 480 BC, right? 480 BC. The Persians had recovered from the battle marathon. They have this massive empire behind them. They had just defeated the Spartans. They had just entered Athens. They had just burnt much of Athens to the ground. And the question for us is, will the Greek world survive this Persian war? And the answer to that is going to come up in our next lecture. All right, hope you enjoyed that. It's fun stuff, and there's a lot to read on and a lot more to learn if you want. We'll keep going with the rest of the story next time.